trip. I'm, hold on, I gotta answer a question. Faculty in the undergraduate program in AULA. Welcome to Messy Conversations, our penultimate Messy Conversation for the spring quarter. A couple of announcements before we get started. Next week will be our final Messy Conversation for spring. And we have a group of AU Santa Barbara students who will be joining us to talk about anti-racist pedagogy from a student perspective. So that should be a lively conversation, and we encourage all of you to join us for that. And then we'll be on break until we start up again for our abbreviated summer session. 4 sessions over the summer, all in the month of July 10th through 31st. So we'll make a bunch of noise about that when we get closer. Also wanted to mention, we haven't announced this in a while, that the Messy Conversations planning team, if you are interested in getting involved in somehow, reach out to one of the members of the planning team, Anna, Sarah Beth, Rosa, Asa, Elaine, Navi, Clarence, or myself. It's a big planning team, but there's always another seat at the table. Or if you just have ideas for a future Messy Conversation, reach out to us. And also, undergraduate students, remember that you can do Messy Conversations as a 1-unit independent study with Elaine Parker Gills. And I know registration is coming up shortly, so consider that, just building it into your course load. As usual, please keep yourself muted unless you're actually joining in the conversation. Helps all of us. And be sure, and if you have any comments, questions, anything, put them in the chat and we will get to you shortly. And today, of course, May 15th is the anniversary of the death of Gloria Anzaldúa. She died up in Santa Cruz back in 2004. So by my math, at least, that's 19 years. And so we wanted to honor her and her work and her legacy here at Messy Conversations. And we're really fortunate to have Rosa Garza-Mourino from AULA and Tanjerine, who teaches at least in AULA in Santa Barbara, and who knows, or excuse me, Seattle, and who knows where else. Really fortunate to have both of them. I've been pitching this and talking about how excited I am about this session, and they asked me, well, why? And it's like, okay, fine. Very briefly, to me, there's a handful of people whose work has been just deeply influential in who I am as a human being. And I count among that handful Gloria Anzaldúa. And, I couldn't begin to make a list of all the things that I've learned from her. But I'll say this much. One of the things that's always drawn me to her, if you want to win me over, use geographic metaphors, and you got me. Like, they fascinate me. And of course she does that continuously, but more than that, I love how the way in which she writes represents the very points that she's trying to make. And what does that mean? Well, how she's a genre mongrel, right? She mixes in the same essay poetry and autobiography and history and cultural criticism and philosophy, and it's just unbelievable. And then she does the same thing with language. And so she's mixing Nahuatl and Spanish and English all the time. And that's just thrilling to me because it's an example of what does it mean to be transgressing boundaries and borders and looking at the complexities of things that and the recognition that nothing is ever only one thing. So with that, I'm out of the way and handing it over to Rosa and Tanji.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Just a quick introduction. And Rosa Garza-Mourino, Undergraduate Studies, Los Angeles. I'm Director of External Partnerships and part-time faculty. And Tanji, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, so my name is Tanjerine, and I have taught Power, Privilege, and Oppression for Antioch, Seattle, and also had the privilege of being able to utilize the conceptual framework, queer spiritual activism, that I from my dissertation, and developing it into a one-unit workshop. See at least one person here from that, so yay. And yeah, I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Utah in education, culture, and society. And just so y'all know, I just barely moved a couple days ago to California from Salt Lake City. So very literally, I am in a Nepantla state right now, very much in between spaces, which I think, I guess, is totally fitting for today. I study what I call transformative pedagogies, and that broadly consists of spiritual activism, which is very much informed by Anzaldúa's work, and has a lot to do with community building, critical consciousness, and healing. And hopefully through the conversation today, we can get a better sense of what all of that means. So I'll pause there.
Oh, thank you, Tanji. Well, I'd like to share with you some information about Anzaldúa. It's gonna overlap a little bit with David's, and it's just gonna reinforce the value that we all see in her work. 1987, Gloria Anzaldúa published in the US her seminal work, Borderlands, La Frontera, La New Mestiza. And this work both describes and applies the proposition that affirming an identity of difference is a radical path to resist systems of domination and specifically bigotry. And her work really responds directly to her personal history as a queer child of a sixth-generation Texan parents who identify with Mexican roots. Born in 1942, brought up on the American side of the Texas border, she frequently faced pretty blunt experiences of marginalization, both at home, at school, and in the larger society, which is to say she saw herself surrounded by othering linguistic, educational, economic, racial, sexual othering. And to address this, as David mentioned, she created a very unique multi-genre writing style. Borderlands, La Frontera, is like most of her other works, is at once a bit autobiography, essay, poetry, mythology, collection of popular aphorisms and feminist theory. And these are written in English, Spanglish, and Spanish, and a little bit of Nahuatl words that are Aztec language, all often colliding in the same page. So this is just the embodiment of her very proposition. So by revisiting in this messy, in the Borderlands piece, she correlates her literal territorial experience to the border with other symbolic borders, and she recognized this embodied in herself, such as being tricultural, trilingual, queer woman of color, first generation college, financially challenged, and who died today, 19 years ago, from consequences of untreated medical conditions that for life stigmatize her physical appearance. So by revisiting in this messy conversation some of her main contributions, we really honor her extremely radical, unapologetic, oppositional work, and how this can inform the possibility to unpack oppression, resist binaries, embrace ambiguity, set up allyships, and hopefully keep moving forward. So let's see how it goes, right? And speaking of this, Tanji, you have studied Anzaldúa's work extensively for your interest, your teaching, your practice. And so tell us a little bit about your encounter, your initial encounter with Anzaldúa's work, with Borderland work, and any personal resonances.
Yeah, so I have two primary encounters with Anzaldúa. The first time was during my undergraduate work. So I double majored in English teaching and gender studies, and I came across her work in a way I imagine a lot of people have. It was, I believe, an intro to feminist theory class, and in the section where they talk about multicultural feminism was chapter 7 of Borderlands, where she talks about mestiza consciousness, right? And that work really stood out to me at the time, primarily because there's a lot of personal resonance. Now, I don't identify as an immigrant. I don't speak another language other than English, but I am biracial, and I come from a visibly multiracial family. My grandmother is from Tonga on my mother's side, and my 3 older siblings are also half Black from my mother's first marriage. And we grew up in a white neighborhood, my father's hometown. It was a rural come suburban neighborhood. So all the suburbanites moving in had a lot of money, and those of us who had dwelled there for a long time did not. And so I had to straddle a lot of different kinds of identity borders, right? You know, growing up in a white neighborhood, but understanding myself as not white, but also not fully like a person of color in other ways, right? And then also being queer and genderqueer, and you know, also being somebody with limited money and means in a place surrounded by affluence. That was a lot of straddling borders for me. And so reading this framework that she was proposing or speaking to as for the ways that it is not a deficit, but actually provides invaluable insight into normative worlds was just, it spoke to me quite a bit. But I didn't really take up her work as much until my graduate work, where I had the wonderful opportunity of taking 2 classes back to back, taught by Dr. Dolores Delgado Bernal. If you're familiar with Chicana feminist studies or critical race theory, you might have heard her name. Really, really delightful classes. And in Borderlands, I mean, both of the Borderlands and Testimonios were the 2 classes that I took. And in both of them, they were pretty much very well grounded in Anzaldúa, with Borderlands very much emphasizing her work. And that is when I first came across her essay called Now Let Us Shift, The Path of Conocimiento, Inner Work and Public Acts, which very much draws on the concepts that she speaks to in Borderlands, but she's refining them and very much pushing readers into a more spiritual dimension, and challenging readers to take her work in that way, because well, Borderlands wasn't taken up in this with the spiritual dimensions as much, though it was well received in other ways, right? And for me, and we can unpack this a little bit, I guess, as we go, I'm very spiritually inclined. I'm not religious, but spirituality speaks quite a bit to me. And she provided me with so much more language and mobility around moving with these issues that it is so easy to become stuck in, right? In these issues of power, privilege, and oppression, where we think there's clarity about them, there's not. And she gives language to the ways in which they can be very opaque, in the ways that we can get stuck on our own beliefs, on our own creations, on our own ideologies, as we're even trying to move our way out of these conditions, right? And so her work very much influenced my scholarly work, but I think, as David said, it also very personally has influenced me. And so, yeah, those are the first
Resonances.
the first encounters with her. Yeah.
Thank you. Rich first encounter. So speaking of straddling, you see this straddling business, and Anzaldúa is just demonstrating it all the time. So if we were to break down this concept of borderlands, going from the literal all the way to the anti-racism potential, how would you go about that? How do you see that going?
Well, I think there's it's a pretty fluid path. It's pretty easy, and we'll actually move very quickly from the literal to the metaphorical, right? I mean, Anzaldúa pulls from her own embodied realities, right? So she grew up in southern Texas, where her family had lived for generations before the creation of the U.S.-Mexico border, right? And so, you know, she says, you know, the border, I didn't cross the border crossed me. And so the line was drawn such that she is north of the border, but, you know, very much Mexican before that, right? And so she had, you know, is in this world where she is not American, not Mexican, and very literally living in this space, also straddling the borders of language, right? English, Spanish. And I recall last week, Rosa, you mentioning something about different ways of speaking Spanish in different contexts, right? And that's another, you know, dimension of her reality. And so she's writing from that, right? Just alone taking up those that kind of positionality, which is very literal, and then it starts to move out very quickly into some more metaphorical concepts, right? What does it mean to straddle these borders? That takes us into some cultural stuff, but I don't know, did I answer your question thoroughly there, or?
Yeah, I think so. I kept thinking about a conversation we had about the geopolitics of this, and then we think about the relationship of the local culture with these identities that were so liminal that she had, and then it would be help us understand the degree of marginalization that she could have when you look at the geopolitics, because we are not only thinking about today, but the 40s. Growing up in the 40s in that Texan context. So the geopolitical element was interesting, and then you address that here. And I wonder with the thinking about personally, my interest in Anzaldúa has been more into the hybridization of rejection of the dualistic thinking, because that's what helps me with every single one of my classes to empower my students. Okay, we don't need to do this or that. Is dualistic thinking, there's no take us anywhere. So just resisting that, it has been just a very useful element. And but something that never occurred to me, and you brought it up earlier today, never ever occurred to me, is to think of these as forms of activism as having a spiritual dimension. Maybe it's my own limitation in terms of confusing sometimes religious with spirituality. So I could see possibly that, but I think you could share a lot about that, Tanji, because of your experience with this and your understanding of the core topic of your workshop. So you have been working on this very seriously.
Sure. Well, maybe can I rewind a little bit and go somewhat back to this geopolitical question, because I think it has a bit of an evolutionary process of moving us forward into the spiritual, right?
Yes.
Particularly with the binary thinking that you're talking about, straddling the borderlands automatically helps to challenge that, because you're not one or the other, and you're not quite both, right? And so you have to hold those at least two contradicting forces together. That creates a whole third thing that both encompasses one and the other and becomes something else, if that makes sense, right? And that is a physical embodied reality that Anzaldúa writes from and theorizes from, right? The workshop that you just asked about is called Queering Spiritual Activism, which could feel a little bit redundant, and I'll explain a little bit why. Because what Anzaldúa is getting at is she's writing from what could be understood as a racially queer, linguistically queer, as well as like right sexuality, gender, these queer embodiments, such that they actually make the normative worlds appear queer. And that provides deeper insights into how the normative worlds work, right? That's something we explore in the workshop, but also that brings us to more of the spiritual dimension of things when we think about how our social positionality, which is informed by our physical embodiments, right, situates us to understand or not understand the world in really important ways. So if we think about systems of domination, right? If I say heteropatriarchal white supremacist, right? That is a way of kind of speaking to these larger systems of domination that play out in material ways, such that people who fit that category, right, have the most power in society. Are you following me? Yeah. Okay.
I do.
Okay. Please ask questions as I go because this stuff gets so complex, right? But that's a way of talking about the way of talking about or understanding material realities, right? That is the body. That's the physical body. Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
We're addressing the literal, the geopolitical, the physical, the body. That is to transcend that, to go to the metaphorical, probably to the spiritual.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I'm thinking a little bit more with activism. When we think about the ways in which critical discourses enable us to identify how our social positionalities influence, how much power, privilege, or oppression we experience. Nope, I lost it. Can you ask me another question to help me come back? Sorry.
Activism. We are into activism and understanding how this connects to activism. Because one thing is to be personally invested in messing up with language and talking about borders, everything that Anzaldúa was demonstrating in her own life, in her own right. One thing is doing that, and the other thing is how that can be extrapolated for others to adopt this framework or somehow apply it to their own circumstance. So this piece of connecting that relationship with oppression, with power, with patriarchy, it's the activism there is just the connection that I think you established that, Tanji, in the conversation so far. It's the spiritual element attached. Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. That's helping me kind of catch my train of thought and where I was going. Sorry.
We're in love with these topics, We are in love with these topics, so we get so excited.
I get excited and I get 5 different ideas at the same time, and then all of a sudden they just don't come out right.
That's very Anzaldúan. What about the queerness element of this?
There's a few ways to explain the queerness element of it. So, okay, right. So, something that's really important about spiritual activism is how it helps us, I said earlier, and it helped me move beyond the stuckness when we were trying to push against these issues in social justice context, right? Critical discourses give us the language to identify our physical identities and our access to power, privilege, or oppression, right? But sometimes they can also make us stuck, because then we start to police those boundaries. We start to treat them like they are real because they do bring about material reality, right? And then we start to fight each other along these same lines of identity categories. And those are given to us by colonization, right? So when we do that, when we're stuck within that realm, then we're maintaining those same worlds, right? We're maintaining those same categories. And Anzaldúa is trying to give us a way of moving beyond them. And this is an activism part, right? So the interesting thing here, and this goes back to what you're getting at with the binaries, is she's trying to get us to understand that both our identities are very important, and when we write from them, we know the world in really important ways. And those identities are what she calls the wounds that divide, right? And she's trying to get us to tap into or work with the wounds that bring us together, which is what she's talking about in the path of conocimiento, right? And how to move through those woundedness, well, through the stages of conocimiento, is through tapping into a broader spiritual connection where we're all connected, right? And that is finding different ways of moving beyond what like our physical reality tells us into a broader understanding of interconnectivity. Now, so this is part of the thing. There's this aspect of spiritual activism, and then you asked about religion, and that's part of the thing that's tripping me up a little bit because I'm thinking about them both at the same time. So I would say that people who are religious could find a lot of resonance with Anzaldúa's work, but you don't have to be religious to understand or engage with the spiritual dimensions of her work, if that makes sense. Because she draws on a wide range of religious philosophies and spiritual philosophies, right? Such that there could be resonance, but she's trying to get at a broader force that I would say exceeds institutional regulations of religion. It's something bigger than that, right? I'll pause there. Where can I connect the dots from there?
Okay. Activism that is opening the possibility for different types of identities to engage in a process of resistance, regardless of the concrete experiences or the literal experiences, leading us to the more universal aspect of this. That is not, you don't have to have this particular background, as you demonstrate, Tanji. You don't have to have this specific identical background in order to position yourself in a place of resistance and allyship, standing against these forms of domination or oppression that she is dodging with her very naughty moves of language and stuff like that. So so I think the inclusiveness of this can lead us to your approach to queerness. When we were talking about last week, we were talking about spiritual activism and queerness in your framework are almost synonymous.
So spiritual activism and queerness are almost synonymous, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, or at least I think I understood a little bit of that when we were preparing for this the other day.
Yeah, I think they are. I think queer could be another way of talking about the spiritual realm, right? In that it is that which exceeds kind of the rational world. That's where emotions dwell. That's where trauma dwells, where indignation dwells. And those are the things that are generally cut off in, say like Western oriented institutions. Those are the messy outliers that we want to push out of research studies, that we want to push out of the classroom, right? That I think if we're trained in Western ways of being, those are the forces and the dimensions that we're scared of. And so we try to create parameters so that they don't come into the space, the academic space, say. And yet that's full of really, really important information. And precisely because it's queer, it's not as welcome. And I think obviously Anzaldúa's queerness factors into that. And I think I read queer theory alongside her work, and there's I often find myself using, say, Ahmed's queer phenomenology simultaneous with Anzaldúa's work, as well as Judith Butler, who talks about the materialization of the gendered and sexed and racialized body, right? And so thinking with the material body and the spirit realm at the same time as a way of thinking about the ideological and the material conditions at the same time.
It's very exciting approach the way you interpreted, Tanji. And we're heading towards the half of the session, but before we open questions, I just want to cover something very, very important. We are in this progressive educational setting, this place, wonderful place, Antioch. We as faculty are committed to foster in our classrooms a supportive context for the interrogation of racism. So we try to do that in different ways. So I'm aware of the role of education is important component in your dissertation, and therefore I wonder about the anti-racism applications of the Borderlands framework to education itself. And this is your focus on transformative pedagogy that is fascinating. I wonder you can comment on that transformative pedagogy, how that looks like in our work.
Yeah, so I think part of it is giving a little bit of a definition of what how I understand transformative pedagogies, right? Mm-hmm. And for me, it's teaching and learning about issues of power, privilege, and oppression, right? But in ways that can help us kind of create beyond it versus being stuck within it, right? And so, you know, I think Anzaldúa provides us with really helpful ways of resisting these forces, but I think a more accurate word is creating beyond them. She's helping us create beyond them, particularly through her work again on the path of conocimiento, this idea of putting Koyo Shaki back together again. It is an ongoing process of trying to break from, you know, oppressive normative frameworks, ways of being, and rebuilding again, knowing that eventually it will collapse. It will, you know, we'll have to redo it again, and to kind of embrace the spirit of that recreation. I think, again, that's really important because when I think that our current conditions stand to make enemies out of a lot of people for anyone involved, right? Speaking for myself, I have a harder time trusting white men, straight or gay. I have a harder time trusting white men, right? And that's for a really important reason. That comes from my embodied experiences of how whiteness plays out, of how male, like people who are socialized in whiteness, people who are socialized in masculinity, enact their identities. That's really important. Anzaldúa would call that la facultad. This distrust, this watchfulness of the ways in which, say, whiteness or patriarchy are going to come at me and wound me again, right? But Anzaldúa doesn't stop there. She tries to find a way of, so like with the path of conocimiento, like how do we continue to create beyond that so that we're not stuck in, say, only resistance or only being guarded against people, because we can make actually really powerful and important connections with many people. We need to figure out the tools to do that, right? And so I want to underscore that that doesn't mean that our embodiments aren't important, because they are, and Anzaldúa would say they are. And it's again the and both, the straddling, it's the holding the two at the same time. My identities are important. It gives me really important insights about the world, and it can also, my lived experiences can also make me listen in particular ways and not listen in other ways. And that can bypass really important opportunities for doing more transformative work. And so holding those things at the same time long enough to do more. How do you translate that pedagogically, right? Like, particularly if we say the classroom is a space that is designed to keep out unpleasant emotions when an issue of racism happens in class, what are our tools to deal with it in the moment, right? I know for me, even with the kind of inner work that I've been doing, my first, my first impulse is to try to get out of it. Like, I don't want to experience this. So how can I make this a more stable space again? But what are the opportunities we miss when we can't go into that, when we can't go into that tension, and to try to work and rework beyond that? Like, maybe we only punish the person who said a problematic thing, or we try to placate that person and try to work with them, right? Can we find other messier ways through that, if that's making sense?
I think this space absolutely makes sense. Yeah. And this topic, yeah, we're gonna go with that, probably, audience, this dodging conflict, like is the mother of many of the problems of denial in dodging, trying to avoid conflict is exactly what creates more violence. But well, maybe that pops up later. Clarence has been like very patiently waiting for us. So Clarence, tell us what is in your mind.
No, 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 no. I was not waiting patiently. I was just trying to do a hallelujah shout and an aid to David Tripp, who talked about in his comment that in Ed Found, and I was going to bear witness to the fact that in Ed Found, we're introduced to Gloria's work and how it resonated with me as an African-American person whose ancestry was the enslaved people. And I wondered during that opportunity in meeting her, if what it would be like if enslaved people had been able to maintain their own languages, as she advocates, maintaining your own culture, maintaining your languages. And that's why I love her work so much, because she writes in both English and Spanish, never, ever, ever letting you forget who she is. And I so appreciate that. And often in Ed Found, or when I came against her work, I was often thinking about Paul Laurence Dunbar, because many times you're in an English class or in a literature class and Paul Laurence Dunbar comes up, and a lot of people don't want to take the time and the energy to really get into his work, even Black people, because it's largely written in dialect. And so that's what I loved so much. And the fact that she shared within her own family, how oftentimes, elders could not speak English, and younger people were deterred from speaking Spanish. And I thought it was just awful that one would be forced, because of a society you've joined, that you could no longer celebrate your culture and use your own language in public. I thought it was awful. So she opened my eyes to so many things, but I found that to be the most affirming in her work for me as an African-American male.
Thank you so much, Clarence. Thank you for affirming that. We see here in the chat, speaking of this contribution, we have Brenda. Brenda, you are making such a wonderful comment here. Would you speak to that, Brenda? And it's going to be very exciting to hear this from Tanji and David. Or should I read it, Brenda, on your behalf? Okay, yes, I'm going to read it on your behalf, Brenda, thank you. As a person who has literally walked the border, coming across Anzaldúa's work in Dr. Tripp's class 3 years ago was absolutely transformative. Now, in quarter 6 of the MAP program, I regularly use Spanish in my papers, a form of decolonization and keeping my work authentic to my voice. I thank her work for giving the permission to be in between without shame or needing to translate to make others comfortable. To avoid conflict. And Asa, Asa, you have a question here. Do you want to bring it up?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I was wondering if you could speak a bit to, and you did touch on this already, both Tanji and Rosa, but in addition to the kind of theories around identity and the figure of the border, like Anzaldúa's writing itself and her voice, and kind of what you find most powerful about it, because I've only read a small portion, like I said, but that's what really struck me. Like, she has a really amazing, beautiful way of writing. I'm wondering if you could speak to what strikes you about it.
Tanji?
It's written with an aesthetic that kind of demands that you do what she's writing about, right? It's not an analytical style where you get the information you think you're looking for and you can go on your day, right? You have to go with her where she's going. And it's so layered and it's so nuanced that every time I read it, I get more out of it, right? Like, I've read it many, many times. I've come through Borderlands, I've come through her essay Now Let Us Shift, and there's always new and insightful things that come out of it. And I think that is part of living and traveling along the path of conocimiento, where the things that we think we know provide new insights if we're paying attention, if we're looking into it, right? In the same way that she embodies her theories, her work performs her theories, right? And yeah, I did my dissertation as decolonial critical participatory action research. I worked with a group of researchers. I brought her work to them. They had the choice to read it. They all read it. They challenged each other to read it. We talked about it. I've in the classes where I don't assign it, there's often students where I will offer it to them, and always people come back with like feeling as if she's articulating their experience somehow, because she's speaking in this, she's tapping into some sort of universal kind of language or experience. I think it has something to do with trauma. I think it has something to do with trying to connect with people. And so those are just a few of the ways in which her work and her style has really spoken to me or resonated with me. Yeah.
And to me, I said, if I can just briefly address that, is as a native Spanish speaker myself, encountering these applications of that language with this creative force, is explosive creative force, is inspiring, is humbling, is just is fascinating. And the fact that she, as David and Tanji brought up already, it demonstrates by doing like a position that is really if you guys allow me the words, funky word that some people don't like, but I like it, epistemological thing. That is a way of knowing things. That is what she's demonstrating just by writing it. And so I appreciate that complexity and how it is so concretely demonstrated. So it's a very, very concrete application. Very useful for my own practice, educational practice, even if I don't teach this text. I have it here for my own self, but I don't teach it. I just absorb it and try to just live it through my pedagogical experience as much as I can. Any other comments? Oh, here we have more. Fox, dear Fox, can you comment on your comment, Fox?
I don't know if I have much more to say about it, or maybe too much to say about it.
or read it to us, just that is your voice, not mine.
Oh, of course. So I wrote, I remember being struck as a young person by Anzaldúa's, did I pronounce that right? How do you?
Anything goes, anything
Oh
goes.
gosh, okay.
Believe me.
Words about how culture can be cruel. It changed me. I continually ask myself this question and have for a decade. How are the cultures we are experiencing potentially cruel?
What can we say, Tanji? Thank you, folks.
I mean, that's a really big question, right? I think there's a lot of ways that we can answer this question. Something that has been particularly devastating in my experience is to find ways in which, or is to having run into the ways in which the culture of activist communities can be cruel. I mean, it's really easy to critique whiteness or white supremacy and those the cruelties that come from there. But in activist communities, when our own work makes us very cruel to each other, that is devastating. And that's part of, I think, why Anzaldúa's work is so important. I think if we, and I'm sorry if you're not familiar with this work, but I think we could characterize our current state of being, our social, cultural, political context as being in the sixth state. We're at a war between realities and we don't know how to find our way out. And because it's so traumatic and so difficult, we are being cruel to each other to protect ourselves. And we're just fragmenting ourselves even more. And so I don't know if that's quite the direction you were taking things, Fox, but that's one of the first things that come up to me, and is how can we find ways to work with our wounds so that we're not cruel to each other, that we can find ways to heal beyond, what we're given.
Thank you, Tanji. Thank you, Fox. And just to contribute a little bit with this, bringing back the idea of the straddling and the openness to more than one version of things. I believe violence comes from unilateral approaches to things. The moment you undertake a unilateral way of doing things, then you're generating violence because it's cruel. You're ignoring others, we're running on others. So that's what reminds me of Anzaldúa, by being open to all these different approaches and versions of things, is flushing from the very beginning the idea that anything unilateral really works, and therefore minimizing the possibilities for violence. But it's so hard to avoid unilateral approaches to things as well, because we want to be right. We want to be okay, we want to be safe. So the trauma interpretation of Tanji, I think, I totally agree with that. And we have David here. Dear David, would you want to address this? Where is that? Is that a question?
Yeah, no, just I wondered
Oh, yeah.
if more could be said about this concept and its place in her work. Because I'm really glad that we've touched on it, but I also know a fair number of people here may not be all that familiar with her work. So.
Tanji, if you allow me, I'm gonna post on the chat some words and maybe we can address them, okay? The 7 stages of conocimiento.
Yes.
I have them here. And there are some Spanish words, but we can resolve them because just Gloria is terrible. Here it is. So there we go, Tanji. Arrebato.
Yes. So first of all, I did I did bring some things with me.
You brought your toys, me too.
So the work that we're talking about here, it's from this book. It's This Bridge We Call Home. It's kind of a sister edition to This Bridge Called My Back. And it's co-edited with Gloria Anzaldúa and Ana Louise Keating, full of wonderful essays. Anzaldúa's essay is the concluding one of the book, where she writes out this path of conocimiento, is what she calls it. It's kind of a journey and a process of coming into knowing and not knowing, right? So there's conocimiento, there's also desconocimiento. As I'm so glad you have this. I had them written in case we needed to talk through what the stages were, but that is so much more helpful just putting it in the chat. But basically, she's kind of writing out these stages that, though she numbers them, they're actually not that linear, right? They can occur at the same, like 2 different stages or 3, or out of order. They can occur at the same time. Nepantla, the 2nd stage, is also happening all the time, right? But it's a way of trying to map out or bring people through this process of coming into knowing, right? And so she characterizes it as, the first stage is this rupture, right? Some sort of breaking. In her essay, she describes it in 2 ways. One of them is an earthquake, where your whole world, just comes crashing down, right? Another one is actually being attacked by somebody. And in both of these instances, it's a kind of way that throws you out of your comfortable world as you have known it, and thrusts you into this in-between space, right? Or Nepantla, where you're suspended between realities, you don't know where to go. The 3rd stage is also called, here it says despair, it's also called the Lique state. There she is pulling from Aztec mythology to make meaning of and how to move with these processes that come in life. I think everybody has, to varying degrees, experienced some sort of trauma in their lives, little t, big T trauma. One of the things that can come with that is being in despair, not being cut off from your inner resources, is also how she characterizes it, trying to find your way through. And in the 4th stage, she characterizes it as a bridging, right? Kind of connecting old world with new world processes, right? And kind of finding your way through, or having a crossing or a compromise, right? And in the fifth stage, she also pulls on this mythology, this concept of putting Koyoshaki back together again. Koyoshaki is this goddess who had been cut up by her brother and thrown into the bottom of a well. And she uses that imagery as when we become fractured by trauma, by the difficulties in our lives, that is, though difficult and can bring us into despair, is also an opportunity to find new ways to put the pieces back together again, right? And that's that creative force I was talking about. It's not just resistance, it's being creative with what we have to create new stories, right? But she says when you do that, you can bring your new creation out in the world, it's going to run into some resistance because the old world wants to stay in place. And so there is a rupture, there's a clash of realities. And that's part of why I characterize our current context that we live in now as a clash of realities. We see, we have seen, I think over the years, tremendous growth and progress, dare I use that word, towards social justice, right? Where we have gay marriages legalized, we've had a Black president, right? These things that seem so promising. And then we have also, it seems with just as much force, this collision of realities, this pushback, and it feels brutal and it feels scary, right? There's the seventh stage, which is shifting realities and putting the visions of these new worlds into action. And again, it's not this, linear process where you arrive at the seventh stage. It's an ongoing process. So you might find little moments of connection where you can, bring your vision into reality while also being stuck in the third state with something else in your life, right? And so it's just this way of kind of attending to those processes. I kind of, I think of it as kind of healing through trauma and the transformation that can happen through that. Of course, it's so much more complex than that, but I think that's my review and overview. So yeah.
Oh, Tanji, thank you so much. Actually, we have a comment here from Mark. Mark, do you want to read your own comment? Or I can read it for you.
Sure, I just want to, yeah, could you read it? I'm having a hard time with my eyes these days, but I do want to
Okay.
just say,
Oh, yes.
this is just so beautiful and generative and such a gift to all of us. And I appreciate the way I'm hearing us engage the conversation and this whole notion that it's both and it's more than one reality, and the progress gets hit with something else that doesn't feel like process, but of course they're all part of the same equation and the same story, and we're trying to create something bigger and better, and it's hard. And I just appreciate that you can see that it's not linear. I love the notion that you can have, I'm sorry, this is not what I wrote. I love the notion you can have 7 stages and you go back to the 3rd stage, because that's true too. That's rare that you see something it's this linear thing, right? So the stages are so helpful, and don't get locked into them, is what I'm hearing you say in various ways, because it's always happening, it's always emerging, and you're connecting from different stages. Tanji, you're just a real gift. Thank you for this session, and thanks for everyone who's joined in. I'll be quiet now. I know I didn't read a darn thing.
Oh, thank you, Mark. Thank you, guys. And Sarah Beth has some wonderful thoughts here too. So you remember her writing from before?
Yeah, when I was very young and grappling with my identity in many ways, I think of the I think she was talking about the transformation of some individuals to animal identity that was a possibility, and in a way of thinking about trauma and healing. And long before we were talking about intersectionality, which also came from that same type of experience. And I just felt really connected to the idea of natural spirituality and natural identity that is about all the creatures. And I think that was just a really important part of my upbringing that I didn't always understand when I was little. My father was really into animals and creatures and trying to help us think about that. And when I read that part of what she was writing, like to think about leaving your own identity and becoming another creature that has strengths and powers, and thinking of identity in so many different ways, it just really appealed to me. So that was what I was getting at.
Thank you so much, Sarah. This borrowing of mythology that she was doing from local indigenous communities, First Nations here in the US and also from Mexico, that connected here to nature metaphors, stuff like that. That was yeah, really interesting to think of that, the universal element there, right? We're talking, Tanji and I, about the universal element of all this, how we can apply it regardless of our origins or our destinations. We're approaching the closing of the hour. We have one more question from Asa. What do you think about this one, Tanji? What would Gloria said about the border wall?
2 minutes.
I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, if we're at this time where we are kind of tearing down a lot of borders in many ways, where there is, you know, when I came out as queer, that was a big deal, right? And it's not that it's not a big deal now, but I think I see people who are my age with much more access to the terminology, to the language for self-identity than what I had. And and much more access to community in a lot of ways. And I don't mean to say that everybody does, right? Like, I understand this is still a really difficult issue, and yet things have changed, right? And so it makes sense that as we have been working to make really important social changes, that we would see a hardening, a striving to reinforce those walls, right? To bring us back to this nostalgic state of white supremacy, right? Make America Great Again is doing that, right? And so it's very fitting in this sort of war of realities that that people would try to build the borders back up, literally and metaphorically, right? So I think that it's part of the process, and part of that ongoing struggle, which I think is helpful also just to disrupt that linear thinking. I think we've inherited this idea in the US that progress is linear, that we came from slavery to, now not being segregated and even having had a Black president. So we can only progress, but I think clearly that's not the case, right? Rights are being taken. People are wanting to reinforce these walls again, and that Anzaldúa's path of conocimiento prepares us for that in some ways. Like, this is an ongoing process. This is not a step backwards. It is part of what it means to make change. And it's scary and it's terrifying and it's not what we want. We don't want to see what feels like a reversion, right? But that is what we have to work with. And I think it feels a little less devastating knowing that it's actually part of where we are. And there's clearly more work to do in that vein. So does that answer your question, Asa?
My own interpretation in a nutshell is borders are meant to be broken. That's the purpose they have in my mind. Transpass. Let's see what happens with this when we transpass this one. New ones. Guys, so we reached the 5 p.m. moment when we know that some folks might leave us. And thank you for sharing this conversation today that I was prepared for you all. And you want to hang out for another 10-15 minutes, we are going to be here. We're not going to go anywhere.
And come back next week.
Come back next week. Yeah. So something that we had here in the pipeline of conversation that Tanji and I were mentioning was the allyships. In which ways this framework from Anzaldúa help illuminate or contribute to build allyships with other groups? We wonder.
Are you posing that question to the whole group now, Rosa?
Yes, to the whole group or to you, Tanji, whoever wants to think about how this applies to building allyships, because allyship is what can bring us together regardless of our so-called differences or because of our difference.
I think it would just,
Oh, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. I was just going to say that it seems just so connected to that piece that I included there of, you know, being of all races and cultures. And that if we can hold that, and even with the mythology, like using whatever method we need to identify for coping, whatever group we can fit with, whatever group we can connect with, whatever identity connects most can connect to others as well.
Thank you, Sarah.
Anna Louise Keating, who co-edited this Bridge We Call Home with Anzaldúa, continues to take up Anzaldúa's work in really important ways. And one of the ways in terms of allyship, I mean, well, there's two things that she talks about. She talks about this idea of listening with raw openness. And I'll pack that in a second, but part of it is also finding commonalities. And she is really careful to underscore that commonalities don't mean sameness, but are in fact sameness, similarities, and difference. And she calls them a potent brew mixed from all three, right? And I think that's really important because oftentimes in our efforts to find, you know, common ground, we erase important aspects of our identities, or erasure becomes likely. And who are most likely to face erasures? Well, people who already have those queer and marginalized identities, right? And so an important part of any sort of connecting, I think, across difference is embracing the differences as well, right? So I come at social justice issues with particular kinds of lens and lived experiences. But, you know, even Rosa and how you've talked about it, I know you have a very different embodied lived experience with these issues, which means that I need to open myself up to hear your reality, even as it might contradict my own, right? And anyone else here, right? And so I think those are really helpful tools as well, is kind of finding that unmapped common ground, which means that my realities might be, my sense of reality might be compromised in trying to understand and take up somebody else's.
Thank you. So count on the difference, count on the conflict, count on the clashing is going to be there, and just work with it. Count on it.
I think even in the example you just gave, Tanji, of like, just because we have something in common does not mean it's the same. Just because we have a shared experience does not mean we actually share it. Yeah, I really love that. And I feel like a lot of times in classes, it's really been important to say, you know, to think about the hook that we use to try to connect with each other. But then sometimes in conversation, we find that those experiences were not alike at all. And it becomes an opportunity for people to hold that together and to hear more and be more curious. But it can definitely go messier, where people just disconnect, disengage, and can't hold that someone's experience is so different, even though they thought it was the same.
We have a comment here by Jennifer. Jen, do you want to read it? I read it, Jennifer. I read it. So Jen has been looking forward to this. Rosa and Tanji wave an even more organic and embodied conversation that I could have imagined in this format. Thank you, Jen. Much gratitude, bravely engaging. GA's work seems the antidote for so much in a creative and hopeful, necessarily complex way through these divisive and fanatical times. Indeed. Thank you, Jen, for that acknowledgement. Just appreciating, of course. Thank you so much.
So I just have to echo that and just thank you both so much for this conversation. So much. And just to throw this in, I know one of the things that students tell me that they really appreciate when they encounter her work in educational foundations is, and it's just one thing, but the kind of personal accounting work that she emphasizes, that she certainly engages herself and then calls us to. And how do you do that? I think she even says it's like the first step towards developing a mestiza consciousness is where you've got to do an accounting and you've got to figure out how much of the crap that you're carrying, was thrust upon you. Forced on you. How much did you pick up along the way? How much did you actually choose? And so I just share that I know that students consistently find themselves reflecting on that and find that helpful.
I mean, I think that's part of what makes our work so healing or even soothing, right? I mean, is that challenge to look inward and outward at the same time. What's been done to us? How have I responded to it? How do I now interact in my world because of what's been done to me? And I think that's something we didn't get to really emphasize in this conversation, but the inner work that happens there. I don't have to enact the kind of world that I inherited, even out of self-defense. There are other ways of being, but also I can have some compassion on myself for the things that I did do in moments where I didn't know how else to move,
So let me ask you a question, Tanji. Because one of the things I really appreciate about Gloria's work is she doesn't make it seem easy, and that there's a price to pay. You're going to do this. You're going to go crazy. It's just not easy work to do. And so then, how do you make your way through then? How do you deal with the crazy of the in-between? And my sense is for her, so much of it is about land, about the earth, about the land. But I wonder what your thoughts are about how do you deal with the in-between? How do you deal with the crazy?
I mean, there's a few things, right? I mean, if we think with the cult liquid state, that sometimes when you're in it, you're just in it, right? Sometimes it's hard to recognize when you're in it until you're out of it. And other times, I mean, personally for me, having a language of right now I'm in the quote liquid state, like that's just where I'm at. Even that language alone helps a little bit to kind of just hold some sort of a sort of pausing, right? But another thing is, and again, just another thing that we didn't get to fully talk about is the idea of nepantleras, right? The people who have had to navigate these in-between spaces for themselves in really important ways. helping others to do the same, right? And so I think personally, when I am thrown up, my world is thrown about, and I'm in Nepantla and Coatlicue State, I look for other people who have traveled these in-between spaces before, even if it's not exactly my thing, right? Like Sarah Beth was pointing out, we can have similar experiences that are totally not the same. People who have the kind of wisdom that can help me through, that can kind of anchor me. Those are helpful ways. And sometimes it just have to be really, really messy and lean into this is where I'm at right now, which is easier said than done. And I don't think Anzaldúa makes it sound easy, but I think in some ways her language, her wording is so delightful that it can feel a little bit romantic.
Yeah.
And I think even like I would say my first major time through the path of conocimiento and what it gave me was romantic. And it also set me up to think, oh, I can do this again. And then when I find myself tripped up all over again, in fact, it's harder than it was before, not easier. Because also trauma wears us down, you know? So I don't know, that's not a concise answer, but I think it's a few kinds of ways of talking about that.
Because trauma is so fundamental to her work, I believe that in a parallel universe, I like to imagine a parallel universe where she's still alive and she went also for a doctorate or some kind of studies on spiritual psychology. Because I think she would have contributed so much to that world, if that would be possible in that imaginary universe that she is no longer able to participate. It's a cool way to remember that she went away. See? Jennifer reminding us that this is liminal wisdom, existence spaces. Indeed. Fox. Quote here, I'm an act of needing, of uniting and joining that not only has produced both a creature of darkness and a creature of light, but also a creature that questions the definitions of light and dark and gives them new meanings. Entrevistas with Gloria Anzaldúa. Addressing this complexity. Thank you, Fox.
Do you want to wrap things up, Rosa?
We can wrap them. We really thank you guys for joining today and for participating and introducing your own responses to the material presented. And thank particularly Tanji for joining as well, be part of this, sharing your background and your interest in these, your studies.
Thank you for having me.
And please come back and visit soon, once you get settled.
Yes, Orange County is not that far from reality. Okay.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
all.
guys. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Come back next week and bring a
Thank you.
friend.
Bring a
Love
friend
you.
next time so that we're 40 something again.
Night.
Brilliant, brilliant, really well done.
Team is here.
Yeah.
How do you feel, Tanji?
Okay. Of course, I'm gonna dwell on the moment where I totally just kind of got flustered.
I would think that that's a demonstration of what we're dealing with here in terms of topics, is that it's not just like a rational conversation about things, linear.
It's also hard to step into some parts of it, not knowing how familiar folks in the space are with certain parts. It's like, how much do I want to talk about like art, bodies, and holding our emotions, and like not knowing quite where to go, right? Or how much to like backtrack. So I don't know, but it's still fun.
Yeah, I hope you enjoy it as much as we did, because it's a great space to be part of. And it's messy, should be messy, should expect it to be messy anyway, one way or another.
Except for